Our next speaker this morning is Jacqui Grant, who is an associate professor of biology at Southern Utah University in Cedar City, where she teaches biology courses and is the curator of the Garth and Jerry Frainer Museum of Natural History. As curator, she directs all educational programs, manages all staff, designs and implements all exhibits, and performs educational outreach for the Southern Utah community. Jacqui became the Provost Faculty Fellow for Parks and Partnerships in July of this year, and she just finished a 3-year term as the Vice President of Education and Outreach for the Society for Conservation Biology.
Okay, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and welcome everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about community-engaged education from the perspective of a primarily undergraduate institution. And awesome, my remote works. You can tell I'm an educator, and I spent a lot of time in the classroom because I brought my own PowerPoint advancer. So I'm starting off with this little quote by Alexander Pope, because why did I decide to combine higher education, which is in such crisis that they're publishing whole entire books about it, with public lands management? And this picture here shows some current events that have happened recently in the United States. Prior to this event, I attended an event down at Dixie State University where several of these gentlemen were present, not President Trump, but some of the other fellows there. And during that particular event, Chris Stewart started out and declared their intent as a group of Utah politicians to work together to permanently legislate changes to how the federal government manages and owns lands, as in not, throughout the Intermountain West. Mitt Romney came in and talked about constitutional ways to prevent the federal government from mismanaging public lands in Utah. And then finally, Rob Bishop here ended the whole thing by declaring that everyone east of the Mississippi was essentially a half-wit. Now, you might be wondering, why did you even continue on this path of working with public lands management and higher education, given this sort of bleak background? Well, for one, I'm from New York State, so I didn't appreciate being called a half-wit. And for two, at this particular meeting at Dixie, there were about 100 people total at the meeting, and less than 10 of them were women, much less minorities. And so for me, that was a clear signal that not everyone was contributing to this conversation. And then finally, which is more related to today's talk, and we'll ratchet down the political rhetoric from here on out, I work at Southern Utah University, where we have been working in community-engaged learning for many years, and that whole program is undergoing a transition, an evolution in how we think about community-engaged education. We at first started out with more of a service learning focus. Utah is a state known for its service. It's an ethic of many of the people in the state. So our students are known for their ethos of volunteerism. We get lots of students out who contribute to the community, particularly people in need within the community. But in these recent years, we've begun to think about our community not just as people in need, as in people who need food or people who need educational assistance or trash that needs picking up, but more in terms of who are our public lands partners. So the BLM has offices in Cedar City. National Park Service has offices in many parklands around Cedar City. The Dixie National Forest has offices and many, many, many acres of land around Cedar City. Why weren't we considering them as part of the community as well? And how can we, thinking of this community-engaged education approach, which involves more collaborative efforts, bring all of these groups together? So our public lands managers and our community members. So I have two questions for you today. The very first one of which is, how can an undergraduate-focused institution like Southern Utah University, which has no formal research program support or structure, we don't have any lab space for our researchers, we don't get any startup when we start our programs, how can we bring our undergraduates into public lands and drag along with them community members, their family members, the people that they know, and help improve management of public lands? And then I'm also really interested in the flip side of that question, which is how can public lands and immersion in public lands help improve student retention and learning, right? Our university, if you're in Utah, you might have heard some of the news stories about Southern Utah. We are really on the push to retain our students. We want to get our student retention rates up over 80% each year, and we're actually well on the way to doing so. So how can public lands help us do that? The University of the Parks Initiative, this little symbol down here, is a recent initiative that we trademarked first as a university 2 years ago, and now we're actually staffing with people to help move forward this a whole thought. What are we doing on campus to help engage our students and help engage our community members in all aspects of public lands, not just the national parks? Okay, so if we look at the mission of the BLM, this is taken straight from their webpage, we can see that their mission is to sustain the productivity of public lands for the enjoyment of present and future generations. And if we think about enjoyment, that has a really nice, clear, direct link to student retention, right? If students have fun, they are going to enjoy their experience at the university, and hopefully they're going to stay there longer and complete their degrees. So how has SUU done this? Through the University of the Parks Initiative. In 2015, we started out with our first event, the Day in the Parks. The Day in the Parks was a university-sanctioned outdoor education experience where the president of the university came on board and provided buses for thousands of students, faculty members, and staff members to go out on public lands, not just the parks, state parks, public lands, Dixie National Forest, BLM lands, and learn about those public lands, or even just enjoy them for the day. There were no classes at all that particular day. So this is a picture of our Jumpstart students. We have a Jumpstart in the National Parks program, where about 40 students each year take all their gen ed courses together, and this particular Jumpstart focuses on the national parks and what they can learn from the national parks. We also, at the same time, we're developing a program called Semester in the Parks. Each semester, we have about a dozen students who live at Ruby's Inn outside of Bryce Canyon National Park, and they work at the inn in the morning making beds. So if you've stayed at Ruby's Inn or any of those associated hotels, one of our students probably made your bed and cleaned up your room, so I hope you left them a nice tip. And then in the afternoon, our faculty members would commute from campus in Cedar City to Bryce Canyon. We would teach at the HIPPI, the High Plateaus Institute, in the park or in public land areas surrounding the park. Oh, and then we published a paper about this Semester in the Parks program as a model for other universities who are interested in using this type of educational activity at their institutions. And we actually published it through Utah State's Journal on Education Practices. So the other thing that we've learned is that the best way for our students to learn content is to have them teach it to other people. Usually, younger people are much less intimidating to our students, and for some reason they're more engaged when they teach younger children than when they teach their classmates. So we've started whole programs that take our students and help them learn their content by teaching that content to younger children. If you can't explain what you're learning to someone who is in first, second, or third grade, then you probably don't understand it yourself. And this is a shameless plug. This is my son and Laurel Glidden, who spoke yesterday, her two daughters at a trip we took out to Dead Horse Point this a couple weeks ago. So one of the ways that we've done this is we started a bio Blitz in Cedar City, the first ever bio Blitz. We had over 300 community members, students, faculty, Forest Service employees, people from a local wildlife rehabilitation group, the Southwest Wildlife Foundation, and the Home Depot contributed hundreds of birdhouse kits. So we all work together at this local park that's surrounded by city, state, and federal lands to inventory the species in that particular area over a 24-hour period. So a BioBlitz is just an inventory of these lands for animals and plants. And what we did was actually focus on our students who were taking herpetology, entomology, ornithology, ichthyology, and mammalogy. We still offer those organismal-based courses at Southern Utah University, and as part of their learning, they interacted with the public to help survey these organisms and teach people the basics about animals and plants on the landscape. Oh, botany would be in there too. I also run this Museum of Natural History, and I engage students in teaching about public lands and organisms on public lands through a dual art and science education field trip program for our local schools. So each year we have about more than 2,000 students from K through 12 institutions in Iron County, so ISCD is Iron County School District, come and learn about art for an hour, and then they learn about science for an hour. The artists tend to do their thing, and then we as the scientists play off of whatever they have rolling. It's just easier for us to adapt our science to their art. But we started with things like, how can we teach students about fishes that live in public lands in Utah and teach them about art at the same time? So we actually, my student here, Delaney Patterson, sculpted our local fish. So you may have heard of something called fish printing. Fish printing is a process where you actually take a dead fish, and then you cover it with ink and you roll a piece of paper over it. It's an ancient Japanese art form known as gyotaku. And then you peel the paper off the fish, and now you have a picture, a permanent record of your fish. It's a thousands of year old art form. Commercially, you can now buy rubber fish, but the rubber fish are all sport fish, right? You can get a bass, you can get a sunfish, you can get salmon, you can get trout. You can't get a humpback chub. So what my student Delaney did was she actually made rubber humpback chubs and shiners and darters and all other sorts of native fish. And it was a way for us to teach students about the diversity of fish in a desert environment and help them learn about public lands that way. We've been doing this program for 8 years now, and we've touched on many different subjects. And we really started from this perspective of, let's just get them familiar with the animals on public lands, like pollinators, this honeybee shown here, and all the different flowers that different types of pollinators that are not honeybees use when they are pollinating native plants out in the field. We've also talked about skulls and bone adaptations in vertebrates, and again, just to get the students interested in the animals that are on public lands. But then as the program matured, we started putting more of a conservation focus on it. This picture was taken right about the same time that I received some funding from the iUtah program here that was housed out of Utah State University, and the time that I started becoming the Vice President for Education and Outreach for the Society for Conservation Biology. But what these kids are learning about is green infrastructure. And when I first proposed this to our artists who were doing a demonstration and an art exhibit on assemblage, collage, and book arts, assemblage is just three-dimensional collage, so this is what that's showing right there. We can call this assemblage. They said, you're out of your mind. No one wants to learn about something as boring as green infrastructure. But it turns out when you put the art side of it into there and you have students build their own green roofs, each student represented a particular background, landscape designer, botanist, entomologist, engineer, and they worked through the program to build these little replicas of green roofs. And then we actually played a game that on the roof of our building that was so loud that the associate dean in my college gave me quite a reprimanding because it was shaking the lights in the room that he taught in whenever we were giving the tour. So you can imagine if you were giving a class and all these lights started to shake, it was because of our educational program. So that's when I knew I was starting to have a good reach, when I made his attention. Tenure, I received tenure about 1.5 years ago. It's a wonderful thing. We've again changed focus on this program. Last year we talked about butterflies and pollinators, and specifically monarch butterflies. And what we did is we created a little booklet for the kids. And the booklet has crossword puzzles and word searches and little bits of facts about pollinators and flowers and that sort of thing. But in the middle, we inserted a little activity for the kids. You know, hey, butterflies really like the Dixie National Forest. Here's why they like the Dixie National Forest. And then we had the kids get a magnet, and we had a big magnetic board, and they had to take their magnet and go say, well, what do you like about the Dixie National Forest? And we had, camping, hiking, biking, fishing, etc., all of those things. So it's a very subtle message. It's directly connected to Utah State educational standards. Kids have to learn how to graph and interpret graphs. They have to learn about Utah flora and fauna. But we were able to sort of start to insert this subtle messaging that public lands are a positive thing. And our undergraduate students were delivering this message. This year, my challenge is a little bit harder. So in the past, I've had like silk art, and it's easy to link silk to caterpillars. This year, our art program is abstract Korean art. So it took me a while to find some sort of connection with abstract Korean art and what we're doing in terms of science. But it turns out that there's a recently discovered set of butterflies that are migrating through Japan and Korea and China, similar to the monarch butterfly. And what we're doing in this case, our subtle messaging is, butterflies migrate. We talk about animals that migrate in Utah, such as deer migrating seasonally from the mountains down to the valleys. And then in the center, there's a map, and this is a little bit more of a social justice issue. The students look at it and we say, hey, humans migrate too. Where did your people come from? Circle it on the map. Okay. So public lands are fun. Students really like to go out on them, and students like to engage with younger children and community members. But how are students themselves at a university like this contributing to public lands management? So one way, we have this amazing internship program at Southern Utah University called the IIC, the Interagency Internship Cooperative. This cooperative puts over 200 students onto public lands every year. Some of you in this room may have worked with some of our interns from Southern Utah University. Okay. This student here, Mackenzie Manis, actually took environmental biology from me as part of the Semester in the Parks program at Bryce Canyon National Park. She had never heard of Tragedy of the Commons until she took that class. We did a really hokey exercise with straws and goldfish crackers, and the students had to compete to suck up as many crackers as possible. But at the end of that, she said to me, I had no idea why we had fishing licenses in this state, and now I understand why we do. She then subsequently went on to work with Evan Vickers to help him craft this resolution encouraging the use of shielded light fixtures on outdoor lights. And this is the initial steps for Utah to recognize the night sky as a resource. So now this is codified in legislation in the state. It's not a law. It's not forcing anyone to put in shielded light fixtures, but it has raised the awareness of the state legislature specifically because she took this class through our Semester in the Parks program, and hopefully it'll lead to more. Oh, and by the way, based on Craig's talk, I'm going to talk to Evan Vickers as soon as I get back about marijuana on public lands and how we can be more proactive in our legislation in this state. Another program, I have a cooperative agreement with the BLM through the Colorado Plateau Native Plant Program, and we collect hundreds of seeds. In 2017, we collected almost 400,000 seeds total from native plants on public lands throughout southwestern Utah, and that employed 2 students. One of them got a little cut off there, but anyway, this employed 2 students and a couple faculty members, and we don't just collect seeds, because that doesn't sound all that intellectually challenging. We take these seeds, we use them for research projects. We're part of a bigger effort that works with local extension agencies to help grow the seeds out and determine which plants are best for public lands restoration, because farmers can harvest them, and then the seeds, the plants go to the farmers grow out the seeds to millions of seeds, and those millions of seeds are what are used for restoration after things like the Bryan Head Fire and other disturbance events in the area. I have a prop today. So before I came here, I stopped at the U. This is a picture of the Grand Staircase National Monument, and in my pocket I have one of, maybe not these Moki marbles, but this is an iron concretion. It's a geological formation that is very common in certain places in Utah. And a few years ago, someone came in with a bulldozer and went to one of these fields and bulldozed a whole entire ton of Moki marbles for the black market. There's actually a market for these. This one's worth a few dollars. Bigger ones can be worth about $100 a piece. So you can imagine how many you would get in a bulldozer bucket. My students and the museum that I run, we help educate all the visitors who come through, which is thousands per year, about what you can and cannot take on public or take off of public lands. And so now, the reason I did not steal this Moki marble, the University of Utah was charged with curating over 30,000 stolen Moki marbles. They couldn't tell exactly where they all came from. They have a good idea where some of them came from, but they all got mixed together in a giant a giant set of containers, dozens and dozens of buckets, and they are now giving them out to educational groups to help people learn about why you shouldn't buy these things at rock shops and why it's illegal to take them. They are a resource of our state and public lands. Okay, another thing that we do is I teach genetics at the university, and as you all know about, we had the Bryan Head Fire. It's sort of eclipsed now with all the big fires that we had this year in more populous areas, but the Bryan Head Fire covered an area about the size of Las Vegas. It was a huge fire. I started talking to our local Dixie National Forest folks about the streams. I work with a fish biologist there, and what we came to is that maybe we could use genetic techniques and integrate a high-impact undergraduate research practice into my genetics classroom and have students use next-generation sequencing techniques to help figure out how streams were being impacted by the fire, and then going into the future, how those streams are improving based on management activities on the forest. So we were interested in not just in providing data for the agency, but also in student learning. We gave the students a test at the beginning of the semester, so START is at the beginning of the semester. They scored a little bit more than 2 out of 9 of the questions on the test they got correct. By the end of the semester, with no quizzes, no exams, just engagement in this research project that had real-world application and was being performed on land in the area where these students lived, their retention of content went up to almost 8 out of the 9 questions on the quiz that we gave them. So we feel that this, we're going to publish this particular thing. We had a whole series of questions based on persistence in the sciences, and we wanted to know, how does working with a real public agency problem help you learn content, but then also engage in your community? Okay, I have a few minutes left. We've since expanded this next generation sequencing type of project to other partners. So Vicki Tyler, who's here today, works for the BLM on their sage-grouse program. We're really interested in, what do sage-grouse in the West Desert and other places in southern Utah, what do they eat? The standard way to figure out what they have eaten is to gather their scat and actually break it apart and look at it under a microscope. When I told this to my students, they're like, no, I have no interest in this whatsoever. And I said, well, what about if we put it in a little tube and extracted the DNA from it and then looked at what was in the scat? So you just have a tube instead of actual poop in your hand. And they were much more amenable to that idea. So we have a group of students now who are extracting DNA from the scat of the sage-grouse. And the next generation sequencing techniques are just newer genetic techniques that allow you to analyze community data. So from a single sample of DNA extracted from the scat of the sage-grouse, we can then look at genetic signatures of the arthropods that they've eaten and the plants that they've eaten. And we can figure out how it's changing based on the sex of the bird or the season or the age of the bird. We're also working with the Red Cliffs Desert Reserve for similar questions on their desert tortoises. We're going to put in some big highways right through these, the habitat of these animals, and they want to know, can we not only learn about what they're eating, but can we get the tortoises' DNA information and then look at population genetics without having to poke them with a needle, because that's pretty invasive for those tortoises. Okay, another project that I'm working on with Laurel Glidden, also at the BLM, who spoke yesterday, is helping build tribal relationships in the community. In southern Utah, we're home to the Paiute Indian tribe of Utah, and we've worked with them to start developing more knowledge for the tribe and for the surrounding community about their native plants. So we put together this native plant brochure for them, and we're building a garden of native plants right on tribal grounds to help them beautify where they are and learn more about their heritage and help us learn about their heritage. So I only have 2 minutes left, but I just want to say this is just the tip of the iceberg. These are a whole bunch of folks at SUU who are doing work on public lands and in public lands areas, ranging from semester in the parks and integrated GE courses, herpetological surveys, genetic work, the IIC, this is Bridget Eastep who runs the IIC, Kelly Goonan and Johnny McLean who have developed the Semester in the Parks program, and Britt Mace who studies soundscapes on the Grand Staircase and has discovered that the Grand Staircase is home to some of the quietest places in the entire lower 48. So, Can public lands help improve student retention and learning? Yes, absolutely so. We've seen lots of cases of it at Southern Utah University. And can our undergraduates, even though they're not based in research labs, help improve management of public lands? Again, I would say absolutely yes. So with that, I have tons of partners and I've probably missed some, but I thank you very much for your attention and I would love to answer some questions.
Thank you, Jackie. Before we take a couple questions, I just want to announce again, if you weren't here earlier, we'll have time for interactions with the speakers during the extended break, which will be right after this, until 11 o'clock. And then at 11, we'll have student speakers start off that next session. So any questions for Jackie? Back?
So the question was, there's a climate-friendly parks program at Zion. We've toured that program as part of the semester in the parks program, and I'm currently working with Zion Parks Forever to help them develop K-12 activities and move into some different areas than they're currently engaging in. So I'll keep that in the back of my mind, that the climate-friendly parks is a good avenue for those programs. Thank you.
There.
Was it? There. Sorry.
So for the tribal work, did you have a tribal name that you've identified with the Paiute tribe for each plant species? Is that what I understood?
Oh, yeah. In that, there is a, well, it's going to take me forever to get back there. Yes, we have some ethnographic studies from the 80s and even earlier that provide the tribal names, the Paiute, and their southern Paiute names, which are slightly different than northern Paiute names. The University of Utah has a really nice a set of northern Paiute names, but we're working on developing the knowledge of the southern Paiute names. And I can't pronounce any of them yet. I'm sorry.
Right here.
Okay. Mary.
How do you integrate then, your original slide showed a lot of the political aspects, and how do you integrate that with the caring for the parks? For instance, the having of grand staircase and so on.
So Mary's question was, how do we integrate this political side of things with caring for the parks and public lands? So part of it is through standard sort of boring science, compiling information. And then the other part of it is through working with the public to develop public understanding and empathy for these things. So I know a person who was in the Clive and Bundy standoff, and she brought her military assault rifle with her down there, but we are on a first name basis, and I hug her when I see her, and we try to talk about how we can, what is good about public lands and what needs to be changed about public lands so that we can work together to make those changes happen through whatever legislative processes we can manage to do. So I think the university, with this new University of the Parks committee and initiative, is really hoping to develop these types of collaborative efforts that we've heard about today and yesterday. So we're just starting. So if you have any tips, I'd really appreciate them.
Any more questions? Over here.
Just a comment. Our colleague here, Karen Mountain is also a geneticist. And tomorrow is planting a whole bunch of trees in the Bryan Head Fire, aspen seedlings. We've been looking for volunteers to plant those trees. I think we have it covered, but it's great to know about your program, and we'll try to tap into it in the future.
Yes, definitely. Karen has been down to Cedar City, and I just talked about her work on a podcast with the president that'll be coming out in the next couple weeks. Unfortunately, that area is now covered in almost 2 feet of snow, so the planting might happen in the spring. But that gives us more time to develop a volunteer group. Thank you.
So let's go ahead and conclude here on the stage. But if you want to talk to Jackie again during the extended break, so come back at 11 and help yourself to refreshments in the restrooms now. Thank you.
Okay.